My name is Callie. I'm 33 years old. I work the night shift at a regional hospital in central Ohio. I'm raising a 7-year-old daughter named Bree on my own. And for most of my adult life, I was known in my family as the dramatic one, the sensitive one, the one who couldn't just let things go, who made everything into a bigger deal than it needed to be, who cried too easily and pushed back too hard, and never could just sit down and be grateful for what she had. That's what they called me, the drama queen. And for a long time, longer than I'm proud of, I believed them. I want to tell you what happened last Sunday. I want to tell you how I ended up standing in the front of a church community room with 25 of my parents' neighbors staring at me and a folder in my hands that contained the most important truth I had ever had to speak out loud. But to understand that Sunday, you have to understand the years that built up to it. You have to understand what my family was doing behind my back, and how long they had been doing it, and how completely I had trusted them while they were doing it. I grew up in Columbus, middle child. My older brother Marcus is 37, my younger sister Denise is 29, and my parents Raymond and Gloria have been married for 40 years and live in the same house on Clover Street, where all three of us grew up. It's a good house. A real neighborhood, the kind where people know each other's names and bring food when someone passes. My parents are well liked there. My dad coaches youth baseball in the summers. My mom organizes the church potluck every third Sunday. They are, by every outward measure, solid and good and community-minded people. Inside the house, it was different. Not in ways that left marks you could show anyone. It was subtler than that. My dad had a temper that he turned on and off depending on who was watching. And when it was on, you felt it in your chest before you heard it in the room. My mom managed him the way a person manages weather. She watched the sky, adjusted accordingly, and made sure the rest of us did too. Marcus learned early to stay out of the way. Denise learned to charm. I learned to speak up, which in that house was the wrong lesson to learn, and I spent most of my childhood being told I was too much, too loud, too emotional, too sensitive, too stubborn. The older I got, the more the label evolved. By the time I was a teenager, it was exhausting. By my 20s, when I was in nursing school and working part-time and barely sleeping and still showing up for every family dinner because I thought that was what you did, it was dramatic. And after my daughter's father left, when Bree was 3 months old, and I was handling a newborn and night shifts, and a lease I couldn't quite afford alone, and I had the nerve to call my mom crying at midnight. After that, it became something colder. Something that lived in the pauses and the looks exchanged across dinner tables. The unspoken agreement that Callie was unstable, that Callie couldn't cope, that someone was going to have to manage Callie eventually. I didn't see it then. I want to be honest about that. I knew things felt off. I knew the way my dad looked at me sometimes felt like he was calculating something. I knew my mom had a habit of telling other people things I'd shared with her in private, telling them in concerned tones, with worried faces, in ways that made me seem fragile. I knew all of this, and I filed it under family is complicated, and I kept showing up, because that's what you do, because blood means something, because I had a daughter who had no father, and I wanted her to have grandparents. Because I was tired and I didn't have the energy to also be right about the people who were supposed to love me. The collapse happened on a Wednesday in March. I was 14 hours into a shift. We were short-staffed. We're always short-staffed. And I was in the hallway between the nurse's station and room 412 when my vision went white at the edges and my knees stopped working. I woke up on the floor with 2 of my coworkers over me, and the overhead lights too bright, and a sound in my ears like static. I had been running on 4 hours of sleep, hadn't eaten since the previous afternoon, and my blood pressure had bottomed out. They admitted me, for fluids, monitoring, a doctor who looked at my chart and then looked at me and said carefully and without judgment, "Callie, your body is telling you something." I was in that hospital bed for 2 days. Those 2 days changed everything, but not in the way you'd expect. Not because of anything medical, because of what happened when I was lying there, phone in hand, with nothing to do but look at things I'd been too busy to look at before. It started because a collections notice popped into my email. I got those sometimes, medical bills, the usual chaos of American healthcare, and normally I'd flag it and deal with it later. But I was lying in a hospital bed with nowhere to be, and something made me open it. It wasn't for me. It was addressed to Betrayal and Watkins, my daughter, 7 years old, a collections notice for a credit card balance of $4,216. I sat up so fast the floor pulled at my arm. I told myself it was a mistake. Someone else's Betrayal Watkins. A database error. Something explainable and fixable. I got on my phone and I pulled up annualcreditreport.com and I typed in my daughter's social security number, the one I knew by heart because I'd used it for her pediatric insurance. And I sat there in a hospital gown under fluorescent lights and I watched the page load. There were 3 accounts. 1 credit card opened 18 months ago. 1 store card opened 14 months ago. 1 personal loan opened 11 months ago. The total balance across all 3 was just over $11,000. None of them had been paid in 4 months. All of them were in collections. My daughter was 7 years old, and she had $11,000 in debt and a credit report that looked like a small financial disaster. And someone had done this deliberately and carefully over the course of a year and a half. I pulled up my own credit report next. I found 2 accounts I didn't recognize. A credit card opened 2 years ago with a $7,000 limit and a balance of $6,800, and a personal line of credit with a different bank for $5,000, drawn almost to the limit. Someone had opened credit in my name. Someone who had access to my social security number, my date of birth, my daughter's social security number. Someone who had been in my paperwork. I knew 2 people who had ever been in my paperwork. My daughter's father, who had been out of the picture for 6 years and had no reason and no access. And my parents, who had helped me with my mortgage application 3 years ago when I bought the house on Elm. My house, the one I'd saved for 4 years to afford, the one I'd put breeze height marks on the doorframe of the kitchen for. My parents had sat with me at the kitchen table with all of my documents spread out and helped me fill out the paperwork, and I had been so grateful, so genuinely grateful, because buying that house alone felt enormous, and having them there felt like proof that family showed up when it mattered. I lay back on that hospital pillow, and I stared at the ceiling, and I thought about every time my father had said, in passing, that the house was too much for me to handle alone. Every time my mother had mentioned, gently, that it might be smart to put the house in a family trust. Every time my dad had suggested that if something ever happened to me, someone needed to have power of attorney for Bree's sake. I had thought those were the normal worries of parents. I had said I'd think about it. I had not thought about it. I got out of that hospital the next morning. My coworker Janet, who is one of the best people I know and who has the specific gift of not asking questions until you're ready to answer them, picked me up and drove me home. I put Bree on the school bus, came back inside, made coffee I didn't drink, and sat down at my kitchen table with my laptop and started making calls. The first call was to the 3 credit bureaus to flag fraud on both my account and Bree's. The second call was to a consumer rights attorney named Dana Rhodes, whose number I found through a legal aid referral. The third call, and this one I had to sit with my hand on the phone for 5 full minutes before I could make it, was to the county clerk's office because Dana had told me to check for any recent filings under my name or my property address. There were 2 filings. The first was a petition for guardianship filed 8 weeks ago by my father, Raymond Watkins, citing a list of concerns about my mental and emotional stability, my history of emotional episodes, my collapse at work, the fact that I was a single mother working overnight shifts, a letter from someone describing me as unable to manage daily responsibilities. The petition asked the court to appoint my father as Bree's legal guardian in the event I was deemed unfit. The second filing was a motion related to my property, a legal challenge to my sole ownership of the house on Elm, arguing that funds contributed by my family toward the down payment entitled them to partial claim. There was a note attached indicating an upcoming hearing date, 6 weeks away. I put my phone face down on the table. I looked at the height marks on the kitchen doorframe. Bree's initials in my handwriting, at each one with the date. I looked at this house I had bought and paid for, and painted the walls of and planted a garden in the backyard of on a Saturday with my daughter helping and getting dirt on her face. This house that someone was trying to take from me. My father was trying to take my house, had stolen my identity and my child's identity to do it, and was simultaneously building a court case to have me declared incompetent so he could control what happened next. I did not cry. I want to tell you I cried because that would feel more human and more satisfying. But what I actually felt was a kind of cold clarity I had never felt before in my life. It was the feeling of a puzzle finishing. The feeling of all the years of you're too dramatic and you're not managing well, and someone needs to be responsible for Callie clicking into shape. They hadn't been worried about me. They had been building a case. Every time they told someone I was unstable, every time my mom mentioned to a neighbor that she was worried about me, every time my dad suggested I needed help managing, they were laying groundwork, creating witnesses, manufacturing a history of incompetence that could be presented to a court. I called Dana back. I told her everything. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Callie, I need you to understand what you're dealing with. What you're describing, the identity theft, the child's credit, the guardianship petition, the property challenge, this is coordinated. This didn't happen by accident or in a moment of bad judgment. Someone planned this, probably over the course of 2 or more years." She paused. "Are you somewhere safe right now?" I said I was. She said, "Okay, then here's what we're going to do." The next 3 weeks were the hardest and most focused weeks of my life. I filed fraud reports with all 3 bureaus, and with the FTC, I filed a police report. And I want to say something about that because I sat in that police station for 40 minutes before I went inside, because the idea of filing a criminal report against my own father was something my whole body resisted. Not because I doubted what he'd done, because I'd spent 33 years being told that family came first, that you handled things inside the family. That going outside was a betrayal. I sat in that parking lot and I thought about Bree's name on a collections notice, and I went inside. I also hired a forensic accountant, Dana referred me, who spent 2 weeks going through everything. The down payment on my house had come entirely from my savings. I had records. My father had contributed exactly $0 to the purchase of my home, which meant the property claim was built on a lie. The credit accounts opened in my name and Bree's name had been opened with my personal information, which had been in those mortgage documents my parents helped me with 3 years ago. The digital trail was not clean. It was not careful. My father was a man who was very good at intimidating people, and not very good at covering evidence because he had spent 40 years intimidating people so successfully that he had never needed to worry about evidence. I want to tell you about my brother Marcus during this time, because Marcus matters. Marcus called me on a Thursday evening, 2 weeks into all of this, and said in a low voice, "Dad told me what's going on. He said you found out about some credit stuff and you're making it into a big thing." I asked him what he meant by a big thing. He said you're going to the police. "Callie, come on. Mom is upset. Can we talk about this before you do something you can't take back? I asked him if he knew about Bree's credit. He was quiet. I asked again. He said, I knew Dad borrowed against some accounts. I didn't know it was Bree's. Another pause. I thought it was just yours. I want you to sit with that for a second. My brother knew my father had stolen my identity and thought that was acceptable enough that he hadn't told me. He only drew a line at my 7-year-old daughter. I told Marcus that I loved him and that I hoped one day he'd understand why I was doing what I was doing, and I hung up the phone. Denise didn't call at all. Denise texted. She sent a paragraph that started with, I can't believe you're doing this to our family, and ended with, you've always been the most selfish person in this house. I read it once and deleted it and did not respond. My mother called on a Friday night and she was crying. And when my mother cries, it does something to my chest that 33 years of conditioning does not disappear overnight. And I sat with the phone pressed to my ear, listening to her tell me that my father had made mistakes, but he loved me and he was scared about my health and he was just trying to protect the family. And if I went through with this, it would destroy everything. And why couldn't I just come home and sit down and talk like a family? I said, Mom, he opened credit cards in Bree's name. She's 7. She has an $11,000 debt before she's old enough to understand what money is. My mother said, your father has always taken care of this family. I said, I know you believe that. And I hung up. The church thing happened because of my father's pride. I want you to understand that. He organized it because he is a man who needs to control the story, and the story was getting away from him. And the only move he had left was the one he'd been using my whole life: get people around him, get people who trusted him, and let the crowd do the work. He called it a family meeting. He told the neighbors it was an intervention. He told the pastor it was about a family in crisis. He got 25 people into the community room of the church where my parents had attended for 22 years, people who had watched me grow up, people who brought my family food and prayed for us, and trusted my father because he coached their sons in baseball. He called me the night before and told me about it. He told me I should come. He said, these people care about you, Callie. They're worried. You collapsed at work. You're fighting your family. You need help. And there's no shame in that. His voice was the voice he used when he was performing calm, measured, reasonable, the voice of a concerned father. I had heard it my whole life, and I had spent my whole life believing it. Come tomorrow, he said. Let people who love you talk to you. I said I'd be there. I spent that night printing documents. My forensic accountant's preliminary report, the credit reports with account opening dates, and the matching dates from my mortgage documents, the FTC fraud filings, the police report number, the court filings my father had made, the guardianship petition with its specific language about my instability, the property challenge with its false claims about his financial contribution. Dana had told me what I could and couldn't share publicly, what was part of active filings, and what was simply factual record. I organized everything into a folder. I made 25 copies of a one-page summary because there were 25 people in that room, and I believed every one of them deserved to know what they had been brought there to help cover up. I called Janet that night. She asked if I wanted her to come with me. I said yes. Janet showed up at my door at 8:30 in the morning in her church clothes, holding 2 coffees, and she looked at my folder and she looked at my face and she said, "You ready?" I said, "I've been ready for 33 years, and I just didn't know it." She said, "Well then let's go." The community room was set up with chairs in a circle, the way those things always are. My parents were already there. Marcus was in the back corner, looking at the floor. Denise was next to my mother, holding her hand. The neighbors were arranged around the room, Mrs. Patterson from next door, who used to give me butterscotch candies when I was small. Coach Darrell, who my father had known for 15 years. Pastor Williams, who had baptized me, people who knew my name and my face and who had been told by my father that they were there to help me. My father stood at the front. He saw me come in and something moved across his face. Surprise, maybe, that I had actually shown up. Or something harder than surprise. Recalculation. I sat down in the circle. Janet sat beside me. I set the folder on my knee. My father began. He said this was a hard morning, but love sometimes required hard things. He talked about my collapse at work. He talked about how worried the family had been, how long they had been watching me struggle, how a mother working overnight shifts and raising a child alone was under enormous stress and sometimes needed people to step in and help her see what she couldn't see herself. He was good. I want to say that. He was very good at this. Half the room was already nodding. Mrs. Patterson was looking at me with soft, worried eyes. Pastor Williams had his hands folded. My father talked for 7 minutes. At the end, he opened the floor and said, "I think Callie needs to hear from people who love her." I stood up. My father said, "Callie, let others speak first." I said, "No, Dad. I think I need to go first today." The room got very quiet. I opened the folder. I said, "I know why you're all here. My father told you he was worried about me. He told you I collapsed at work and I haven't been coping and my family is scared. And I want to say first, to all of you, that I know you came because you care. I know Mrs. Patterson has known me since I was 6 years old, and she is here because someone she trusted asked her to be. I'm not angry at anyone in this room except the people who organized it." I held up the one-page summary. "I'm going to hand this out. You don't have to read it now, but I want you to have it because what I'm about to tell you is something you deserve to be able to verify." Janet stood and moved around the circle, placing a sheet face down in front of each person. My father said, "Callie, this is not the place," and I looked at him and said, "You made it the place, Dad. You put 25 people in this room. You called them here to watch. So let them watch." I turned back to the room. I said, 3 weeks ago, I was in the hospital after collapsing at work. While I was in that hospital bed, I found a collections notice sent to my 7-year-old daughter's name. When I checked her credit report, I found 3 fraudulent accounts totaling over $11,000. When I checked my own credit report, I found 2 more accounts I didn't open, totaling nearly $14,000. Someone opened all 5 of those accounts using personal information, mine and my daughter's social security numbers, our dates of birth, our home address. That information was in the mortgage documents that my parents helped me complete 3 years ago when I bought my house. The room was completely still. I filed a police report. I hired a forensic accountant. I found that my father also filed a legal petition 8 weeks ago asking a court to grant him guardianship of my daughter, citing my mental and emotional instability. He filed a second motion challenging my ownership of the house I paid for myself, claiming he contributed to the down payment. He did not. I have the bank records. The summary in front of you has the case filing numbers. You can look them up on the county court's public website. Every word I'm telling you is documented and verifiable. My mother made a sound. I did not look at her. "I am not here to destroy my family," I said. "I'm here because my father put 25 people in this room to hear that I am unstable. And I think those 25 people who have known me, who live in this community, who have children of their own, deserve to know what unstable actually looks like. It doesn't look like me. It looks like opening credit accounts in a child's name. It looks like filing false court documents. It looks like organizing a public meeting to discredit your daughter the week before a court hearing." I looked at my father then. I had been avoiding it because I knew what I would feel, and I needed to get through the words first. He was standing very still. The expression on his face was not anger, yet. It was the expression of someone whose plan has failed in a way they didn't model, and who hasn't yet decided what to do next. I said, I have spent my entire life being told I was the dramatic one, that I overreacted, that I made things bigger than they were, that I needed to calm down and be grateful and stop making everything so hard. And I believed that, Dad. For a really long time, I genuinely believed there was something wrong with me that needed to be fixed. That's what happens when you hear something enough. You start to carry it like it's yours. My voice was steady. I want you to know that. I was not screaming. I was not crying. I was standing in a church community room in front of 25 people who had come to watch my father manage me. And I was not being managed. I'm not dramatic, I said. I'm accurate. There's a difference. And it took me until I was 33 years old and lying in a hospital bed to understand that the people who need you to doubt your own perceptions are almost always the people who are doing something they need you not to perceive. I perceive things very clearly now, and I am done apologizing for it. I sat down. Janet put her hand over mine under the table. The folder was closed on my knee. Pastor Williams was the first person to speak. He said, in a very quiet voice, Raymond. Just that. Just my father's name. And the way he said it carried 22 years of knowing someone and finding out you didn't know them as well as you thought. Mrs. Patterson turned over the sheet of paper in front of her. She read it. She looked up at me, and her eyes were wet, and she said, Baby, I had no idea. I said, I know, Mrs. Patterson. That's why I'm telling you. My father tried to speak. He said it was more complicated than I was making it sound. He said he had concerns about my mental health that predated any of this. He said the accounts were a misunderstanding and the court filings were protective, and I was twisting everything the way I always did. His voice had lost its performance of calm. The real thing was underneath now, the tighter, harder voice, the one I had grown up learning to anticipate. Coach Darrell stood up. He's a big man, quiet mostly, not someone who uses a lot of words. He said, Raymond, I've known you a long time. I'm going to need you to stop talking right now. And he said it without anger, just with the flat certainty of a man who has made a decision. And my father stopped talking. Marcus left the room about 10 minutes in. I saw him go, and I felt something for him that I don't have a clean word for. Not forgiveness. Not yet, but the recognition of a person who learned a long time ago to survive something by not looking at it, and who was still not looking. I hoped one day he would, but I couldn't wait for him. Denise cried and told my mother that I had ruined everything. My mother sat with her hands in her lap and did not speak for the rest of the time we were there, and I watched her from across the circle, and I thought about the woman who had called me crying on the phone the week before, and the woman who had told me my father had always taken care of this family, and I understood fully, finally, without anger, that my mother was a person who had made a choice a long time ago, and had made it so many times it no longer felt like a choice. I couldn't fix that. I could only stop letting it fix me. I stayed for 30 minutes. I answered the questions people asked me directly and honestly and without drama. I told Pastor Williams that I was not asking anyone to take sides. I was asking people to be clear-eyed about what had happened. I told Mrs. Patterson that I was okay and that Bree was okay, and that we were going to be okay, because that was the truth, and I needed to say it out loud in front of witnesses. When I stood up to leave, Pastor Williams walked me to the door, and he held my hand for a moment and said, "You conducted yourself with a grace today that I am going to remember for a long time." I said, "Thank you." I meant it. In the parking lot, Janet put her arm around me, and we stood there in the Sunday morning light, and I breathed. Just breathed. The way you breathe when something heavy has been set down. Not thrown, not dropped in anger, just set down carefully with intention in a place where you don't have to pick it back up. Here is what happened in the weeks that followed. Dana filed the formal response to the guardianship petition, accompanied by the forensic accountant's report and the fraud filings, and the petition was dismissed within 2 weeks. The property claim was dropped 4 days after that, after Dana sent a letter outlining the evidentiary record. The criminal fraud investigation is ongoing. I'm not going to speculate about outcomes because I genuinely don't know, and because the outcome matters less to me than the record. The record exists. What happened is documented. My daughter's credit is being cleared, which takes time and effort, but is happening. Mine too. My father has not called me. My mother called once, 3 weeks after the church meeting, and said she was sorry that things had gotten so far, and that she hoped I knew she loved me. I told her I knew she loved me. I told her love and accountability were not opposites, and that I hoped she was talking to someone. She said she didn't know what that meant. I said that was okay. I told her I needed space right now, and I'd reach out when I was ready. She said okay, and she sounded small and tired, and I sat with that for a long time after we hung up, because grief and relief can live in the same breath, and that's okay too. Marcus texted me in April. He said he was sorry. He said he hadn't known about Bree's accounts, and that didn't make it okay, but he needed me to know. I said I appreciated that, and I was glad he reached out, and I needed more time. He said he understood. I believed him, and I'm holding that belief carefully, like something that could grow into something real if both of us decide to let it. Denise has not contacted me. I am at peace with that in a way I would not have expected. Some people need the story to stay the way it was because the alternative is too disorienting. I hope she finds her way to a different relationship with the truth. I cannot wait for it. Bree doesn't know the details. She's 7. She knows that Grandma and Grandpa are taking a break from our life for a while, and that it's grown-up stuff, and that it doesn't have anything to do with her, and it doesn't mean she's not loved. She said okay and asked if we could have pancakes, and we had pancakes, and she put blueberries in a smiley face on top of hers and showed me. And I laughed a real laugh and thought about how the clearest things in the world are always the smallest ones. I went back to the river path. I went back to work, back to my life, back to the house on Elm with Bree's height marks on the kitchen doorframe. I went back knowing the difference between drama and accuracy. I went back knowing that the voice in my head that spent 33 years telling me I was too much was not my voice. It was borrowed. It was placed there by people who needed me not to trust my own mind. And I had finally, cleanly returned it. I'm not going to tell you it was easy or that I'm completely okay or that there aren't nights I sit with a cup of tea in my kitchen and feel the specific sadness of understanding who your parents actually are. That sadness is real. It's allowed to be real. Grief does not mean you made the wrong choice. Sometimes grief is the proof that you made the right one. What I am going to tell you is this. I am the most clear-headed I have ever been. I am the most free I have ever been. I walk into my house every day, and I look at those height marks on the doorframe, and I feel what it is to have something that is mine, really mine, chosen by me, paid for by me, belonging to me, and to my daughter, and no one is going to take that. Not because I'm going to fight forever, because I already fought, and I won, not by destroying anyone, by showing up with the truth and refusing to let anyone talk me out of it. My name is Callie. I am 33 years old. I work the night shift, and I'm raising a 7-year-old who puts blueberries in a smiley face on her pancakes. And I own my house, and I know my own mind. They called me the drama queen for as long as I can remember. Turns out, I was just the one who was paying attention. And the Sunday they put 25 people in a room to watch me fall apart, I walked in with a folder full of truth, and I showed them exactly who I was. I've never been more certain of anything in my life. If this story hit home for you, if any part of it felt familiar, please check your credit report today. Check your children's credit reports. You can do it free at annualcreditreport.com, and it takes less than 10 minutes. Familial identity theft is one of the most underreported crimes in this country because most people do exactly what I almost did. They file it under complicated family stuff, and they let it go. Don't let it go. Your name belongs to you. Your child's name belongs to your child. No one, not a parent, not a sibling, not anyone who loves you and needs you to believe they mean well, has the right to use either of those names without your consent. Set the boundary. Speak the truth. Stay until you're safe. And then walk out into the Sunday morning light and breathe. You'll know what it feels like. It feels like finally